Welcome to Karen's Conversations number 25. I'm very excited to be talking to Lana Yakimoff, and our conversation today is going to be SIAM, Service Integration and Management. Is it really that hard? My experience from organisations that are trying to do this is that they're really finding it a tough journey. So before we get into that conversation and explore that issue or challenge, I'm going to welcome Lana to Karen's Conversations 25 and ask her to introduce herself and tell us a bit about you. Welcome.
Hello. Hi from down under. Hi, my name's Lana. I've been in the industry and met some great people like Karen and so forth. I've been I've come from an operations background and spent a couple of years, or 12 years, 15 years doing operational roles at help desk back then, change manager, release, SACM, service delivery, operational delivery, and eventually moved into consulting, and as I really enjoyed working on projects and delivering outcomes and so forth. So yeah, I've spent the last 15 odd years or longer delivering projects and working on implementations, tool and process, all that sort of stuff, all the fun stuff, integrated governance models, operating models, and SIAM obviously as well, so which is what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, really excited to be here, and thank you.
No, more than welcome. This has been a long time coming for you and me.
I know. We're all busy little bees, aren't we? Yeah.
So it's great that we've made it happen. So a lot of the listeners are probably, or the viewers may have heard of SIAM, but for those that haven't, or have had little exposure, how would you sum up what SIAM is all about?
Yeah, look, last year, for instance, before the SIAM body of knowledge came out and the foundations course and so forth, there was a lot of this, that, and the other, a lot of, well, it's a process, it's a methodology, it's an operating model, but we've got some clear clarity now, and it's great that we're all trying to get on the same page. But basically, all I can say is it is a methodology that tries to bring things together. It's not just multi-event in management, it's much, much more than that. Typically, you've got lots of vendors delivering services through towers. You've got different processes, procedures, different tools, different, some governance, some not, different maturity levels. So SIAM is about trying to bring it all together and find an operating model where you've got a services integrator that brings, it helps to bring it all together. Now, the customer typically has this sort of want to go to this place because they have difficulties managing their vendors. They've got all sorts of problems. One vendor does this and this vendor does that and so forth. So this is really about bringing it together and having a collaborative environment, an ecosystem that works together. It is a lot of work. You really need to think about, what kind of model that it would work for you, where your services integrator sits, how the towers will then integrate into that. You've got the boss of bosses sort of thing. And you've got to look at, how the services integrator is going to function, think about some of your core processes and how they will work, and hopefully have one process and one tool. However, that's utopia. Quite often you get a multi-process, multi-tool data exchange that happens, so lots of integration work and so forth. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's about defining your operating model, how you want your vendors or service providers to behave with your processes and procedures, and it's done through the governance capability of your SIAM operating model, in a nutshell.
Now, I want to pick up on one thing that you said there about, because I think a lot of people have this assumption that it is just about supplier management on a bigger scale. And you sort of said there's a lot more to it than that. So tell us a bit about. So
with your SIAM capability, you need to understand what operating model is going to work for you. In a typical multi-vendor management model, it's just the customer managing the suppliers. So that's the sort of outsourcing model that worked, many years ago. So typically, if you go back to where SIAM came from, I came across it back in 2007 for a service integration project. You know, it had been around for a while there, a few years. Back then you had massive contracts where the big players such as IBM would be the service provider to a customer, and they may outsource components of the service towers to vendors that'll help them deliver services. You had these monolithic service providers, huge contracts and so forth. Economies of scale were great, but things changed. Things really started to change in the ITIL service management world, where they decided, well, let's get best of breed. So they divided up their services and developed service towers. You know, platform, server, application, whatever, which of course eventually caused problems, you know, the typical siloed effect that we have now. So in a need to fix and get better economies of scale, they developed this silo problem, service tower problem that we are facing today. SIAM is about eliminating that and seamlessly saying, right, we're going to have a services integrator who's going to manage these service providers, and they'll all play along nicely in the sandpit. So you can have a hybrid model where your service integrator is some of it's inside the organisation and retained, where some of it's external. You can outsource the service integrator model completely to an external service provider that's not in your current ecosystem. The third model is where you do it yourself as a customer. You are the services integrator. And then you've got the ability to have you know, one of your current service providers not only provide, say, services within their tower, but also act as the services integrator. All of them have their merits, but they have obviously pros, but there's also obviously cons. You really need to understand that. So that's where it's come from. There's been a need to deliver seamless, better services, and this is where they've decided to come up with this model. It's come from the UK. There's a lot of history about that. Most of the great stuff comes out of the UK. You know, we've got our ITIL, Prince 2, you know, all that wonderful stuff. You know, Sophia, we've got SIAM, you know, what's next?
They've
Can't
obviously
wait.
got nothing better to do.
I know. See, here in Australia, we're busy delivering. So therefore, we don't have time to come up with these things. But God bless our UK friends.
Absolutely. Now, Lana, you've sort of touched on it, that, you know, and to me, organisations have had a couple of suppliers or multiple suppliers for a long, long time, as back as you can think. And they've had to try and manage them and govern them. And all of a sudden, this SIAM thing springs up and says, this is how you need to manage your suppliers and the services they provide. So you've said it came out of the UK. So what do you think triggered, you know, SIAM and its emergence as a sort of framework for doing?
Yeah, good question. It's definitely because what they had before with the one provider delivering all the services, irrespective of who you know, was helping them, you know, the other tiered suppliers, they weren't getting the best of breed. So, for instance, yes, they were saving money. However, their services weren't quite where they wanted them to be. I think what's happened out of that, they've, you know, as I mentioned before, they've outsourced these services to service providers who specialised in certain areas, you know, whether it's, you know, application, server, so forth, comms, you know, video, etc. And they found it very hard and difficult to manage operational delivery, but also service delivery, right? And also the customer delivery side of things. So you've got three key things there that were just not quite right. What they realised over time is they needed to have an ability to integrate these services through a body of some sort to help them manage it from an operational perspective. So management is at the service integration level. However, the governance was still retained with the customer, because you can't outsource governance. So the management through the service integrator provider would manage the end-to-end operational capability. I've got a security scan happening right now. Fantastic. And there was a real need to make it happen better, make it seamless. So I think a lot of the I think the big consultancy organisations, a lot of the big consulting companies such as KPMG, Deloitte, etc., they all came up with this capability, as well as other service providers as well, like your CSCs of the world, your Capgemini, etc., etc. So they were all working on this capability, and they called it service integration or SI. The SIAM word hadn't come up yet, and this is back in 2009. So you had these people working on the concept without the actual word itself, SIAM. They always knew that they needed to somehow manage and integrate the services so they were seamless to the end user, the customer, and ensure the customer experience was brilliant. But in the back office, there was a lot of coordination and management and governance that needed to sit on top of that. So eventually, over time, they came up with that, because this is about enterprise management. This is about governance. This is about all of your best practices working together. So, it's about integrating your governance and management of your services end to end. It's not just within a specific service tower. It's across the towers. It's cross-functional.
Awesome. And that leads me on to a question that, and I know you and I have talked about, so the sort of questions I'm going to throw you. I'm going to throw you one we haven't talked about. If an organisation thinks of its organisational structure,
yeah,
where does SIAM, or where should it sit?
It depends, right?
Oh, you're just a true consultant.
I had to throw that in there, right? So, look, okay. So first of all, I'd be saying, why do you think you need SIAM? What outcome are you looking to achieve? But what business problem or customer issue are you trying to resolve, or is it completely back end stuff, back office stuff? So, if they answered all the right questions, it's like, well, you've got 4 options, right? You've got we'll retain the services integrator within our organisation, so it's internal. Or you can take that whole services integrator function and move it externally outside of your organisation. So all they do is manage the service providers and report back into the customer. That seems pretty simple, especially if you don't have the right skill sets or the numbers in your organisation, etc., to do this, because it's different skill sets to work within a SIAM operating model. Or you can have a hybrid where you keep half and you outsource the other half. That's quite complex, but it suits some organisations. But there's many complexities, such as, your processes need to be integrated. For instance, if you think about change management, pretty complex process in a large enterprise organisation. So if you think about multiple service providers, a services integrator, process ownership, service owners, and so forth, who gets to approve a major change? It can become a nightmare, where I've actually seen organisations have anywhere up to 14, 15 approvers. Potentially risk averse, yes. However, is it stalling approvals and hampering the ability to deliver changes and services and improve them to the business? There's so many things you need to think about. So if you look at the operating models, you've got to think about how they're going to operate from a process, procedure, governance perspective. So there's 2 models, internal, external. Then you've got the hybrid, which I just talked about, which is complex as well. And the 4th one, you can have the ability of one of your current service providers act as well as their service delivery arm and tower, also work as the services integrator. So you've got to think about what's going to work for you. You've got to think about the pros and the cons, what's going to work with your current capability, your current way your processes work, your current skill set within your organisation. Do you need to bring people in, or do you just outsource that function? Do you go the economies of scale, or do you bring it in and make sure you have really good governance and management internally? So many questions to ask, so many pros and cons, and difficulties. You need to map scenarios to understand. Each model is easily in concept to understand, but you need to think about it, take a step back from an operations perspective, do some case studies or scenarios to say, right, what do we do in this case? How will it work in this particular model? What about this model? What about this model? So you're almost testing the operating model with processes and scenarios. I think that'll give you a really good understanding of what's going to work for you in that essence. Some people just look at a model and just go, that's the one for me. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's my experience. They haven't done that, you know, due diligence is probably the wrong word, but that experimentation or which model's best for me. I mean, taking just a couple of those models, Lon, you've talked about pros and cons. I mean, can you, I know it depends on the organisation, but what are some of the pros and cons of each of those?
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks, so one of the key things is commercials, right? Commercials is always going to be a huge stumbling block. It could be considered a pro and it could be considered as a con. One of the things we did when we did a SIAM implementation 4 or 5 years ago or longer, year 5, I had the task of understanding the vendor ecosystem and landscape because they couldn't tell us what it looked like. So through discovery, lots of interviews and so forth, I was able to draw up the vendor ecosystem. So everyone outside of the organisation that was delivering services. So we did a tier 1, 2, 3 and 4 approach. Once I mapped all that and developed a little org chart, what they realised is they had something like 75 service providers to vendors who were in there delivering services. That's complex.
Absolutely.
So I think you need to understand that, right? And you can't just say to them, okay, right, we're moving into SIAM model and we're going to work this way, because there's commercial realities there to be adjusted, readjusted, understood. Some of these contracts, if you look at some of the contracts, well, I had to analyse the contracts as well. They were so vague in what they were complied or delivering. There's a lot of work. If you need to readjust and have a look at the contracts, understand when they're expiring, and potentially get ready to look at adding an appendix to say, right, this is a SIAM operating model, this is how we're going to operate. Please sign contract here because this is part of the new way of working. So that's one thing. The commercial realities and complexities is a con. One of the other difficult things as well is the cultural element. I know this is dear to your heart. It's not easy. It is so not easy, as you all know. I read a great article of yours last week, is having to do OCM in order to deliver OCM. Brilliant. I loved it. Loved it. Everyone should read that. If you haven't read it, you're very naughty. Get on LinkedIn or Macanta website and read it. It was brilliant, and I thought it was very well written. But culture is huge, and not just internally within the customer organisation. It's the service provider culture that needs to have a rejig as well. Some partners are great and others are not. Everyone's different, and it depends on that service provider's or vendor's culture, because they're all inherent and different. And we need to be able to understand that. We don't have to necessarily like it. It's not about liking it. It's about acceptance and understanding different ways of working and perhaps slowly changing it over time. Behaviours are also a con. Some service providers I've seen over the last 10 years since I've been doing this, their behaviour is abhorrent, and it's almost like they're doing a favour to the customer for being there and charging them a mozza. So it's really interesting. The old school service providers, or vendors I should call them, really, even the new ones, the new ones are okay. They just really need to change their attitude, and the way they think about how they deliver services, because SIAM is about collaboration, cooperation. It's almost tribal-like. We're all groups in a tribe. We have chiefs and lots of Indians running around doing things. But those chiefs had to get together to say, right, we agree to this, and we're going to make sure that we all collaborate, cooperate, and we work together, not against. We're all here to deliver seamless service, because if one fails, we all fail, and that's the way it should be. And they need to change that within their organisation. But it's a lot of work, as you can imagine.
Absolutely. And so Lana, with your vast experience in this area as a consultant, if I knocked at your door and said, Lana, I'm organisation X, and I think I need to do SIAM, what would you say to me? And I think you've touched on some of the things like what the
Yeah,
drivers
yeah.
were.
Oh, look, this, first of all, I'd be saying, I'd like to understand why. Why are you doing this? What's the problem you're trying to solve, like I mentioned before. I think you need to, so that's understanding the purpose of your journey. Like, why are you doing this? And then perhaps, define the benefits and what benefits can be realised and value and all that sort of stuff, return on investment. I think the next important step is to say what's our operating model. Out of the four that there's many more, because you can have all sorts of things, but the four key ones that have been identified to date, and over the years this will change, but which is your preferred operating model? Internal SIAM, external SIAM, hybrid SIAM, or existing service provider SIAM on top of their service tower. So that you really need to think about that. It's so important. And once you've kind of figured that out, you need to then define your SIAM strategy, your SOAP, your strategy on a page, because then you've got to start selling the journey, selling the story, to get everyone on the same page. I think ensuring that you know your strategy so that you can tactically execute it and operationally ensure that you're able to do all the activities, get everyone involved. There'll be bits that your service design team need to do, your service transition teams, your PMO will need to do stuff, your business relationship office, your design authority office. There'll be all sorts of things that they all can do to help this journey. So yeah, your upskilling of your staff and the organisational change is huge. So I think you need to make sure your leaders are working with. You can't have the one leader driving this. You'll have multiple leaders, so including your service provider leaders working with the leadership team to make it all happen. So you need your governance layers, who are defining the strategy, and your management through your tactical and operational capabilities to then execute on those. I think understand your risks, your issues, your challenges, be upfront, address them, be transparent. Transparency is key in this. If you're not transparent, you might as well not do it. I just say to you, you can't pay me enough money, and I'll recommend someone else to work with you. And I can't harp on this enough. Organisational change, understanding, and communicating. What needs to happen is so vital, and promoting your successes. And having it out there so you can see that deliverables are actually being delivered every quarter. Maybe it's stuff like that. Making sure that everyone understands their roles, their accountabilities, and what they should be doing, and so forth, and identifying your key stakeholders, all that great stuff. But understanding the purpose of your journey, what operating model and your strategy is really key, but also understanding your current vendor ecosystem or service provider ecosystem. Who's in your ecosystem delivering services that's not within your organisation? So all your third parties, know what that looks like, because you'll actually be shocked once you actually do that. And commercial reviews. Commercial reviews should say this is our, things about your agreed operating model, expected behaviours, but also risk and reward is so important. That can help really, most people are motivated by money, and that's a great thing to put in a commercial agreement. However, if one of those people fail in the model, we all fail.
Yeah.
Is the concept in a nutshell. So yeah, lots. And there's I haven't even touched on the technical element. The technology in all of this is mind-boggling. Licensing, if you've got a SIAM operating model, whose tool, where does the data lie? Who owns the data? Who owns the processes? What if your other providers have their own tool? So there's data exchange required. What happens when they leave because you've found someone else to deliver that particular service? So you need to have the ability to plug and play. I know that sounds easy to say, but it is difficult. It can be quite a minefield. You've got your monitoring tools. That the technology side of thing is absolutely astounding. Absolutely astounding.
Yeah, it's absolutely. For those people, this is another curveball for you. For those people who are watching who say, well, I'm in service management, I do problem management or business relationship management or service level management. What does the organisation adopting a SIAM operating model mean to them? Where do they sit?
You just cut out then because I had a bit of a glitch here.
That's all right. I'm just checking my sound. No, it's all right. So for people working in service management, who are maybe problem management or business relationship management, service level management, and the organisation says we're going to adopt the SIAM operating model, what impact does it have on them in terms of where they sit in the organisation? Where does the service management office reside?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's huge. I mean, this is, so it depends on, once again, your operating model. If you outsource, so you've got to go through your process to say, what are we going to keep? What's going to be important for us to retain within the organisation? You've got to have those conversations. What things must we keep? And they're really the things such as your governance processes kind of thing. What do we outsource? The things that we currently don't do, or the things that are potentially easy to do. So you need to have a look at, you know, the kind of skill sets you have and potentially the gaps that are missing. A lot of organisations will outsource things such as the service desk, because you know, you've got organisations out there that just specialise in that, and that's a key capability to outsource. But you've got to make sure you get the right provider, right supplier, because it's not just about money, cost savings. It's about providing customer service, the customer experience. So you've got to get an experienced provider. The service desk is probably one of the first things that potentially goes. And then with that will go things such as request fulfillment. You've got, you know, potentially incident management going out, problem change. It's hard. There's so many opinions out there, but you know, it's probably one process that you may want to retain within your organisation. All your planning stuff, your design authority office really should be retained in, unless you can have virtual resources that come in and out from your service providers if you need specialist skill set. I think your SMO should be within the organisation, but there's components of that could be outsourced, and that's really your service desk, because there's cost savings there, but also there's organisations that do it so well. It's their bread and butter. Right? You know, and your major incident management might be sitting there, your request fulfillment manager, they have a quality office within a SMO for the service desk. So you've got to look at those sorts of things. You know, capacity manager, maybe that's something that's outsourced to all the service providers, and that is a coordinated process. Availability management, same thing. IT service continuity, well, that's a minefield, that one, because it's probably something that I would have retained within the organisation, but you work and coordinate with the other service providers. Service level management, you can outsource that, but you've got to have really good data to do that. I'd leave that in. That's something that I think should remain in. I think project management is another one. Your PMO potentially should remain in there from a governance perspective. Let's say the program office potentially and portfolio should remain. You might outsource that third little layer known as the project office, who do all the project work, so they can report into the governance layer. So you can see now there's a lot of complexities in splitting things up. So that's the sort of thing you need to do. You need to look at what does a SMO do? What does a SMO do in our organisation? Because every SMO I've seen is different. And that's okay, because this is about developing what's good for us and suits our business needs. You look at your SMO, all the functions and the processes that they deliver, and have a good hard look at what you can extract and outsource. Same with your PMO, same with your design authority office, your quality office. Security, there's another minefield, you know, security potentially. Do you leave it internally, or do you outsource it to a top-notch security organisation, service provider? So many pros and cons with all of these things. But you're going to lose roles when you go along this model, because you've got to think about outsourcing components, because you can't possibly potentially do this all yourself. And we're talking about organisations in the enterprise space or the government space. So real tier 1 and 2 orgs, or large government organisations that are potentially doing this. Small organisations can as well. I think there's many benefits to it, but you've got to be quite simplistic in that. And I think they do that potentially because they don't have the skill sets internally so they can outsource certain components of a process, such as capacity, availability, or event management. So it's a lot of homework to get this right.
Yeah, which really is a nice lead into my next question. So I've come across, as I'm sure you have, organisations that have already started on the journey and they've downloaded what they can find from the internet, and they've got some white papers that came out of the UK whenever about what SIAM looks at, and just going, it's a mess. We just don't know where we are. It's a whirlpool. What would your advice be to those who've actually embarked on this journey and are just really struggling with it?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to first of all say, okay, like number one, why are we struggling? Why are we struggling? But I think, what are the blockers? What are the things that are just, who's putting the walls up? And what are those blockers, and also why? So having those frank discussions, because you will have blockers, and you'll need to come up with, okay, well, plan A didn't work, let's do plan B, C, and D. You have to have those plan C and D. So there's your risk and issues register potentially. And, a lot of it will be people, vendor. It's all people. People internally, service providers. It's massively in that space. Because it's politics, it's position, it's, who can get what real estate and so forth. Not just internally, with your service providers. So have a look at your struggles, but also understand those blockers and get them in the room together and have a tribal conference to say, what is going on, and get to the bottom of it. Why are we struggling? This is a blocker. This is happening. This is what you're doing. This is what I see here. Why is this happening? How can we work around it? So you really need to understand those particular issues. So seek to understand. I think because some of them will be internal blockers, some of them will be external. I think the biggest problem that I've seen those already on their journey is, and this is going to be an issue for a couple of years yet. It's still fairly new, even though it's been around for a while. When I say new, I say agreed theory, methodology, such as, ITIL's been around for so long and we've had many increments of it. So SIAM, we've got this that came out, which is great. So, we've finally got a body of knowledge. Now, this has come from various consultants internationally who've all put together their experience, their knowledge, and trying to put together some theory. And there's good, there's bad in here. But at least we're starting to have that conversation and having common language, some different types of approaches. Remember, it just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's gospel, it's theory, and you must do it to the T. Let's not go down the ITIL pathway.
Absolutely.
Please, people, please, it's a guide. It's a guide.
Guidance.
Yes, it's a guide to say you could do it this way, or this way, or this way, or this way. Have a think about it. So that's my next thing is education. People, if you're struggling, it's because everyone's got a different concept and idea of what it is, because they heard Joe down the street when he was having lunch, and Bob at the water cooler said this about SIAM, and this is what it really is. So there's a lot of different opinions out there. You need to get everyone on the same page. So education or awareness. You can have the executive level awareness sessions, say this is what it could be. This is the guidance that's out there right now. This is the value you might perceive out of this. And then maybe at a management level have an awareness or an educational session that might be a few hours, and very much focusing on the strategic tactical components and education of that. And then at the operational level, where the rubber hits the road, you really need to make sure they have awareness sessions and understandings of what it is once. Because if you don't have everyone on the same page and everyone's got a different idea, you think it's pink and I think it's black and there's polka dots down the corner, we're in a lot of trouble. This is probably why you're struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel a blog coming on, SIAM needs OCM.
Yay! Please.
That might be a joint one, Lana. Who knows?
I'd love to. Yeah,
that would be fun.
Yeah.
You just showed us then one of the sources of information. My last question for you for those, and I really believe you've whetted a lot of appetites from what we've talked about. So people go, okay, now where do I go? Where can I get more information about SIAM and the options and what I need to do if it's right for me, etc.?
Yeah, look, you know, it's all starting to develop. So, you know, about 4 years ago, we had, you know, some white papers come out. So, you know, it was very theoretical, but it was great. It was getting the conversation out there. It was marketing, SIAM, and so forth. And a lot of that came from independents. I think some were independently written, others were written in conjunction with Axelos. So there's some good stuff to download there. So get yourself a membership. There is obviously this SIAM box. So this has come out from Scopism. Some really great people have put this together. Really good reading. So remember, it's a guide. Now they've also have a foundation course, so you can get a certification, get yourself a cert. And you know, there's that avenue, and it's based on this books, which is great. There's some other books that have been written, and this is a really good one. This was the first SIAM book produced by 4 very intelligent individuals. Now, from reading this book, my comments are it's very strategical. Right? It's very strategic. There's a lot of theory. There's a lot of other things they bring into it. It's a book for theorists. It's strategic. And I think the Scopism book is very much it touches different levels, a lot of operational, tactical stuff. Obviously, as you know, there's the practitioner level of this book and course coming out later this year. So that'll fill that gap. And obviously where they'll go to next is your typical, you know, level 3, master of SIAM, you know, expert or whatever they're going to call it, you know, guru. Tribal leader, SIAM. I'm not sure, but that's, you know, at least we know the practitioners coming out. There's a lot of people blogging about it, so you have to be careful with that. So remember their opinions and experiences and so forth. But that's fine. I think when you read these things, you do see and hear and learn a lot of nuggets that might be very relevant to you, but not relevant to others. So I think the more you research, the more you try and understand the different elements of it, the better comprehension you'll have and how it may fit into your organisation and your culture and your ecosystem, which is really important. And the more you get out there and search, the better.
Absolutely. And I think
and watch this podcast.
And I think one of the key messages, and this applies to a lot of things, it's like one size does not fit all. You know, I think one of the key messages you've come across is, you know, look what's out there and what's going to work right for your organisation. So I'm going to go back to 1980s ITIL, adopt and adapt. What works?
Please, yes. Please, yeah. They're all guides. They're all there to inform you, so you can then go back and consult, and then you can then, you know, get on your SIAM little journey. And good, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Lana, it's been an absolute awesome conversation. As I said earlier, it's been a long time coming due to whatever's happened, and I am so glad that we've had this conversation. I'm sure it's going to generate a lot of interest. So I'd like to say a big thank you for your time and joining me on Karen's conversation. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I feel privileged. And thank you very much.
You're welcome.